Some things are impossible to know, but it is impossible to know these things.
Hello, good day, and welcome to
Paul Schindler, podcast on things is here for you.
Not surprisingly, I'm your host, Paul Schindler. Thank you for listening. Welcome to this week's Hey You Kids, Get Off My Lawn edition of PS, a podcast on things. That's a joke if you were listening closely last week. Lost Computer Chronicles shows. You've probably heard those stories about missing episodes of important shows that are found in an attic or under a house or in a box in a storage locker. Well, I was uploading all the Computer Chronicles video I had and checking it against the Internet Archive. Imagine my surprise to find out I had 2 lost episodes of the Computer Chronicles, first and second shows of the 7th season. Gold among the dross. The new episodes will soon be available on the Internet Archive along with all their brethren. Keeping my word. Now, you know, movies are preceded by extremely short films called previews. They're teasers that make you want to see the upcoming movie. Well, my teaser last week was a promise that there'd be no mention, only one mention, of AI this week. A promise I'll keep, but wow, do I have a lot of stuff for next week. Now, here's a quick bit of movie trivia. Back in the time of the big movie studios, it was said that if you couldn't boil it down to a preview, it wasn't a very good movie. And of course, today, it's often the case the preview shows every good moment in the film, especially previews of comedies. AWS failure. The recent worldwide Amazon Web Services failure proves that AWS is a single point of failure for the Internet. At least one analyst says Amazon knows the source of the problem, but isn't fixing it because it's too expensive. Another, a friend of mine in the computer security racket, says simply that Amazon was lying about the cause. He says, yeah, a total shit show. Blaming a bad DNS was bogus. Ginger. My mother found it easy to cut people out of her life. She did it to her mother and her brother and almost did it to my brother. One cutoff was her best friend, Ginger. Ginger had moved next door with her husband, Ron, and her 2 children in 1972 after Steve and I had both moved out. For nearly 30 years, Ginger and my mom were inseparable. They vacationed together, she came to my wedding, and she was part of the texture of Mom's everyday life. But sometime in the middle 90s, Mom had a falling out with Ginger. Ginger had disregarded some of my mother's advice, and my mom did not take kindly to having her advice disregarded. She was so upset, she cut Ginger off. This was awkward as Ginger continued to live next door. When I came to visit, Mom made it clear that we were not to stop by Ginger's house. She was civil to Ginger, but that was it. Well, things might have continued that way until Mom died in 2010, except that Ginger knew Mom was dying. Despite a decade of deep freeze, Ginger, a deeply religious and compassionate woman, picked up their friendship as if it had never been interrupted after Mom's diagnosis with cancer. And Mom simply accepted that things had gotten back to normal. They never discussed the cutoff. No one asked for forgiveness or an apology, yet all was forgiven. My dad had planned to take a year's sabbatical from his bus driving job to support Mom and drive her to chemo and radiation. But after a few weeks, he was driving Mom all right, driving her crazy. What she needed was support, transportation, and company from Ginger. And that is what she got. Ginger came over for a cup of tea every morning after Dad left for work, then took Mom to the hospital, stayed while she was treated, and brought her home. Periodically, Ginger called me with progress reports. During Mom's last few months, Mom's best friend from college, Jan Carnes, drove her RV from Arizona to Portland so she could care for Mom. Ginger let Jan park the RV in her driveway. I was put in mind of this because Ginger doesn't just talk the talk of being a Christian. She walks the walk. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Some people who claim to be Christian, no names, appear to be cafeteria Christians. They pick and choose which parts they want to live by. Not Ginger. She's one of the few true Christians I've ever met. This just in, my First Amendment doomsday clock has moved 1 minute closer to midnight. It's now at 10 minutes. Quotes. Comedy writer P.J. O'Rourke once wrote that drugs have taught an entire generation of Americans the metric system. Two quotes from baseball's Casey Stengel. One has to be careful quoting him. He admitted that some of his best lines were attributed to him by sports writers. Stengel may or not have said, the key to being a good manager is keeping the people who hate me away from those who are still undecided. He's also reported to have said, I was such a dangerous hitter, I even got intentional walks in batting practice. Golfer Lee Trevino, the older I get, the better I used to be. Basketball player and coach Pat Williams once said, we can't win at home, we can't win on the road, I just can't figure out where else to play. The late, great Robin Williams opined, the manly sport of golf, where you can dress like a pimp and no one will care. Now, you wouldn't have known this if I hadn't decided to tell you. I briefly considered doing the quotes with a different voice for each person quoted, like people do during books on tape. I thought back to my previous efforts and decided to avoid the pain, except now I'm going to do it anyway. My best old person voice was stolen from Phil Proctor of the Firesign Theater. You can wait here in the sitting room or sit here in the waiting room. Now that I'm an old person myself, I know that's a pretty crap imitation. Now, I was privileged to voice Stimrod, the 6-foot drunken bear that I was forced to write into my musical tragedy, SPTGSETSF, Sam Patch, the greatest story ever told so far. The only words Stimrod knew were, you're the only friend I've got. As Sam died, Stimrod's attempt at goodbye was, Good-eye, 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 Sam. Before I go, I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and that's my opinion. I'm Paul Schindler. And now, a quick plunge into the pool of Sam Patch with the inimitable Clark Smith singing Why Jump? Little context, the Mr. D to whom he is singing is a reporter from the Herald named Detweiler. I did Detweiler's voice too, since he and Stimrod never appear in the same scene. Sam jumped from great heights into small tubs of water, a career he explained to Detweiler in the song Why Jump?
Why jump? Why, Mr. D? I'm quite surprised that you should ask this thing of me. If you'd seen 10,000 admirers from 100 feet up, you wouldn't ask me. Why jump? Why jump? Why, tell you what, I don't suppose you ever thought to ask why not. It's been a hard and rocky road, and now that I'm at the top, I want to stay there, so I jump. I couldn't choose a simple calling like a pastor, attend the sick, and wear a robe, 'cause deep inside I know I'd rather court disaster and know that I'm the greatest jumper on the globe. Why jump? Why take the chance? I guess you might say that it's sort of like romance. If you can tell me when a young guy's heart is shattered into grist, why he'll still come back just hoping there's a chance he was missed. You couldn't stop him if you bound him at the ankles and wrists. He'd still keep trying on the off chance he'd get one little kiss. If you can tell me why these things called hope and happiness exist.